Hi everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Mark Mancina. Mark started scoring films in the late 80s, but it wasn't until 1994 when Mark got his big break scoring Jan de Bond's film Speed, a project that made him a very sought-after film composer. In his long career, Mark wrote the music for Speed, Bad Boys, Con Air, Twister, Assassins, Training Day, Disney's Tarzan, Brother Bear, Planes, Moana, and many more. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mark, it's great to have you here. At first, I would like to know more about your early days. As I understand, you were one of the first kind of members of Media Ventures. You had started collaborating with Hans Zimmer on several films such as Days of Thunder and True Romance. What was your experience like back then when Media Ventures was founded?
Yeah, that's going back a ways. Before that, I think it's kind of interesting to people because when I've told this story before, people have seemed to be interested in it. But I was actually a songwriter and, a sort of a producer. I had worked with different record producers in Hollywood, all sorts of different people. And I was trying to get a record deal myself. And so I was working in LA with some demos. And the engineer that came in to sort of do the final mix of these demos was a fella named Jay Rifkin.
Yeah.
And Jay was Hans's partner. And he kept telling me about Hans. I had no idea who Zimmer was, and I wasn't really interested because I was kind of pursuing my own songwriting and my own thing. But Jay played Hans some of my music, and Hans asked him if I had any instrumental music, and I had been writing all sorts of stuff and doing all sorts of little documentary work and all sorts of things. So I had quite a bit of music, and I sent it to Jay, and the next day Hans called me and said, come to the studio, which was up in Santa Monica. It was an old studio called Wilder Brothers, and Zimmer was just set up in the control room, and then they had this big other live room, and I would just bring my gear in my trunk and set up my gear in the main room and do whatever was going on. It was commercials, it was trailers, it was work on films, it was working with Billy Idol on Days of Thunder. I mean, it was like all sorts of things, and it was kind of a big mess. I mean, because, they just had equipment everywhere, and I would roll my stuff in, and my stuff would be everywhere. And then I'd put my stuff back in the trunk and go sleep in this flea bag hotel. But, as we were kind of doing this stuff, I kind of already knew my way around pretty well. And so when Zimmer would give me a tougher assignment, for instance, why don't you do the arranging and the producing of the songs on this little movie called The King of the Jungle, which of course became Lion King. That was one of the early projects I worked on before Speed. So I was kind of putting together I Can't Wait to Be King and Hakuna Matata, and Can You Feel the Love Tonight. Those songs, I was putting them together in my little house in Huntington Beach way back. This is way back, probably 1990, probably. Eventually, Jay and Hans decided to build their own building, which I thought was going to be fantastic because it was just Hans and I and Jay. So it was really, really fun. And really great, but really Hans had much bigger ideas in mind. He wanted to establish more of a compound. And as soon as other composers started coming into that little world, I kind of got out because I didn't really want to do that. I didn't want to be in that.
Yeah, I mean, Lion King, you're right, it was released in 94, and Hans also said they kind of worked on it for 3 or 4 years. So you're right, they probably started in 90, 91, so it was way before Speed, actually.
The reason I remember that is that I had, in '89, I had gone on tour playing keyboards and guitar with Trevor Rabin.
Yeah.
So I just remember getting off that tour, having no work, and going back to a bar in Newport Beach and playing Top 40 for a while to make ends meet. So.
We just mentioned Speed. I mean, you started, in the 80s. You got bigger assignments, after that. Also, you did the worst Sleeping Dogs Lie, and ultimately Jan de Bond had hired you to write the music for Speed, but as I understand, Michael Kamen was initially set to write the score, yet Jan hired you specifically, which I think reportedly caused some sort of discord with Fox, the studio.
Oh
Um,
my God.
could you tell me a little bit about what happened back then?
You know, there was a movie that I did before Speed that was called Monkey Trouble.
Yeah.
The director came in. The only reason I got that movie was that the director hated the score. I don't know who wrote it. It was somebody before me. He hated the score. The director came in and said to me, this last composer, I hated the music so much I could have killed this guy with my bare hands.
Really?
That was my introduction into the film, really filming or really doing scores with directors. You know, so when Speed happened, yeah, I got the go-ahead from Jan, and the studio called me and said, "You're absolutely not doing this film. Don't do anything." And then Jan would come in my room and say, "Start working. I want to hear themes." And then the producer of Speed, he would call me and say, "You're not doing this. We've already hired Michael Kamen." And so I was in a really awkward position because I was writing the score to Speed, but the studio was telling me I wasn't writing the score. And they were told me Michael Kamen was doing it. Now, I have huge respect for Michael Kamen. And so I called him and said, "Look, I'm a complete unknown guy, but the director is here and he wants the score from me, and I don't really know what to do. I don't want to step on your toes. I don't want to do anything bad, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do." And by then, Michael had gotten the word that I was going to do it. So Michael was very gracious and said, no, please, have at it, do it. And he couldn't have been nicer about it. Now, that same exact thing happened on Assassins. Michael Kamen was scoring Assassins, and the producer called me and said, "I want you to do this."
Joel Silver, right?
Yeah, and I had to call Michael again and say, "Michael, I'm not chasing you around. This is just the way the business happens sometimes, and I feel really bad." But again, he couldn't have been nicer. And I saw Michael Kamen before he passed away in London when we opened the Lion King there, and he was such an amazingly generous and sweet guy.
Yeah.
It made me feel really good about what I was doing because I felt like he understood, and he's done the same thing with other composers, and what are you going to do, right? So.
Funny you mentioned Assassins. I was actually going to ask about Assassins later on, but since you just mentioned it, I've heard that Michael Kamen actually recorded and wrote the whole score, and it was rejected by Richard Donner, the director. That's what I heard.
Yeah. I don't think he wrote the whole score. He did, though. I did use something he wrote, which was that little girl singing at the very opening of the movie. That's something Michael did. It was really cool, and I took it and kind of did all sorts of twisted things with it. But I don't think Michael did a whole lot more than that. And Michael had David Sanborn doing a lot of stuff with him at that point, and I think David was doing some stuff, but I don't think it just did. At that time, I had the action thing going, and everybody thought I was the action guy, and so they just thought I was the hot thing, and that what Michael was doing was looking backwards. It's the same old thing as it is now. Everything goes in cycles.
Michael actually got a credits. I think his name is still in the end credits. They called the piece "Day of the Dead," I believe.
Oh yes, correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm glad he got a credit. He wrote it. I mean, he deserved it. Yeah.
Is it true that you had to come up with an entirely new score within 12 or 13 days on Assassins?
Yeah, that's true.
My God.
And it was ridiculous. And I wrote into the dub, I had an out date, but of course they didn't honor it. The editor called me screaming at me to keep writing, and there was all sorts of problems with doing that. I would never do that again. It was one of those things that, it happened then, and I did it, and I learned that I would never do that again.
Crazy experience. I mean, I actually love The Assassins. I think it's one of, as far as I'm concerned, one of Richard Donner's finest movies of the 90s, and also one of the better films or best films starring Stallone. And considering the time pressure, I think you and your team did a tremendous job on that one.
Yeah, I had John Van Tongeren and I had Don Harper. Gosh, and I'm not sure if Nick Lenny Smith worked on it or not. I can't remember. If he did, then he would have helped out. But it was ridiculous for everybody. to do it that quickly. I liked that film, and I liked Dick Donner a lot. I liked working with him. But we never did anything else again. So,
Mark, I was actually, before you mentioned Assassins, I was going to ask you about Bad Boys, because the film itself was a tremendous success in the 90s, in 95, and
right.
you wrote a tremendous score for this picture. I think it's still one of my all-time favorite action scores, especially one of the standout action scores of the 90s. You know, one of the best ones ever produced in my book.
Well, thank you.
And looking back at today's action films, the scores sound very different. What do you think enabled you to write such a massive and powerful score back then? And what was it about the 90s action scoring that actually made this possible?
Well, from my point of view, there are themes in it. I mean, when I go to see action movies now, I don't hear any themes at all. I rarely hear.
Yeah.
They're gone. And, it's part of it is the composer's lack of being able to write a theme. And the other part of it is that some of the directors don't want themes.
Yes.
They feel like it dates their film, and they feel like it's too obvious, and they'd rather just have a bunch of wallpaper. And that's why, quite frankly, I don't do any action movies anymore. I'm not interested in wallpapering. There's a lot of guys out there that have a lot of equipment that can do that kind of thing, and I'm not interested. For me, I grew up, in music, with themes, whether it was the Beatles or Genesis or whatever I was really into at the time, it was thematic music, and it stayed with me, and I could hum it and I could listen to it over and over again, and it had depth. So when I got into film scoring, I just felt the same way about it. I felt like with Bad Boys, you could just score that movie with a bunch of hip hop beats and all sorts of crap, and just tell yourself that you're really current and you're really on top of it. But I looked at it like, Florida, there's got to be some Caribbean reggae thing somewhere in it. There's got to be action stuff that's really exciting. These guys are totally heroes. There's got to be a heroic theme to it. There's got to be comedy to it. It's a lot. It's a lot to it, and
Sure.
it's not just wallpaper. And I think, personally, I think that's why that score, I get a lot of requests for that score from people because they never released it on, I don't think, on
No, they did. Actually, La La Land released it. It
Oh,
was
La La, yeah, yeah.
in
Um,
2007, actually.
yeah, that's right. You're right. But it wasn't a fun experience. I can tell you, it was not fun because it was Simpson and Bruckheimer and Michael Bay. So, you put Michael Bay in a room with Don Simpson and music, and it's a disaster. Jerry, I could relate to. Jerry wants the best, and I always kind of got Jerry, but I just didn't enjoy it, and they didn't understand why I didn't want to keep doing their movies, and I just didn't enjoy it,
Okay.
They wanted me to do The Rock, and I ran from that movie. Not a chance, man,
So were Don Simpson, Bruckheimer, and Michael Bay equally, I mean, involved?
Oh, it's so weird. I mean, Michael Bay was like working for a little spoiled brat, and Don Simpson and Jerry, sometimes they'd come in and I'd play my cue and they would have newspapers and magazines and they were just reading. And they weren't even watching the film or watching what the music had to do with the film. And then Jerry would say, "Nah, write it over." And I would just stand there dumbfounded. I mean, the foot chase is a really good example of something that I just kept pounding them with the foot chase. They just didn't think it did that much. And then when we got really close to the dub date, they thought it was the best thing I'd ever written, and it was exactly the same piece of music. So, it was frustrating. And I did work with Michael Bay one more time, but I left that project. It was Bad Boys 2 because he had been told that he was a genius, so he just had this amazing air about him that I just didn't want anything to do with. So.
Amazing. Yeah, I was going to ask you about Bad Boys 2 as well. Because, frankly, I mean, the first movie was so much fun, and it had comedy, it had action. The second one was so over the top. I mean, they had like 10 times the budget, and I felt that the movie was a mess.
Well, it was like Speed 2. Speed 2 was a mess. And, it was very similar. And that's what happens is that the first one, they work really hard to squeeze it out. And then the second one, they have so much money and they just blow everything up because they just want to blow stuff up because they think that spending that money, people are going to think it's great. And neither one of those films are good films. I did my best, but, did I do?
I mean, but yeah, well, Speed 2 wasn't, well, it obviously doesn't even compare to the first one, and
No.
same goes for Bad Boys 2, and both film-wise and score-wise. I mean, you did probably the best you could on Speed 2, the score. I mean, I know a lot of people that like the score on Speed 2.
It was very hard to get that to work. It just, Jan had been, Jan and I had done Twister. So, I mean, we were on this amazing roll. And again, Twister's a very thematic score. So,
It is.
And Jan likes that. So when he came to me with Speed 2 and it was a ship, I was just freaked out. I just was like, anything but a ship. I mean, it's called Speed, for God's sakes, anything goes faster than a gigantic cruise ship. So I just couldn't understand what they were thinking. And it made it very difficult to write music for it. I don't think that Jan particularly liked what I wrote on that movie because I didn't work with him much. Again, I did a couple of commercials with him at one point and tried to, we were going to do Meg, this movie that's out called, I think it's called The Meg now, but it was called Meg. We were going to do that movie about 15, 16 years ago, Jan and I, and it would have been really good with Jan. Unfortunately, it didn't get made with Jan. So
we were just talking about Speed 2. As I understand, I mean, you had also started working on Con Air, and as I understand, and as I was told, the schedules kind of overlapped, and you had to leave Con Air early. Did you still get to write something on Con Air? Or how?
Oh yeah. Well, I wrote. Trevor and I wrote the main theme, and we wrote the trailer that came out that was the theme for the whole movie. Mm-hmm. I had a lot to do with that. And I wrote cues. I wrote a lot of cues. I wrote a lot of chase cues. I wrote a lot of action cues. But I did leave it early. Trevor had never really scored a whole lot. He had done a little bit of stuff with Steven Seagal, if you want to call that.
Yeah, Glimmerman. Yeah, that was his first.
Yeah, Glimmerman.
His first movie. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was kind of new at it. Jerry wouldn't hardly even talk to him. But see, the problem for me was that not only did I have Speed 2 and Con Air, but I had The Lion King on Broadway, and that was my big focus. And it was impossible to do all of those projects. So I got Trevor on Con Air against Jerry's wishes. And, after I finished Speed 2 and Con Air, I really was into theater, and I really wasn't that excited about doing those kind of movies anymore. I was really looking for something else, historical period piece, something else that, but of course, because I was the action guy, that's all people wanted to talk to me about. Nobody wanted to talk to me about a movie with a beautiful theme. They just thought I was the action guy. So.
Yeah, but you've proved several times that you can write beautiful themes. I mean, your music to me is very expressive. It can be emotional, detailed. You have a very great fondness for percussive instruments.
Yeah.
I was this morning I was listening to Moana, which I loved, and also I also revisited one of your early scores. I think you did it in '95, which was called Fair Game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well there was some really cool music in that film. So you do have a variety of styles. I mean,
Well, I did a movie called Moll Flanders.
Yeah.
And I really liked that score, although I had absolutely no money, and there's like 4 players on the entire score besides me. But I really liked doing that kind of thing, but I just didn't get those kind of movies. But I was so lucky, really lucky, to have a connection to Chris Montan at Disney Animation, because animated films, like Disney films, are definitely the adult work. Big grown-up composers. I mean, if you look at the list of guys, it's not very big. And most of them, you've got Randy Newman and Tom Newman, and you've, really accomplished composers, and Disney doesn't suffer fools. So I was very fortunate not only to get in with Chris Montan during The Lion King, and then go on to do Tarzan with Phil Collins, but probably an even bigger break was to work with John Lasseter and do Planes and to do Moana with Lin Miranda, and now we're working on some other stuff together, and so it's really great. I mean, I feel like that was my vehicle. Disney was my vehicle to show that I had a lot of depth as a writer.
Tarzan and Brother Bear to me are some kind of prime examples. Of course, Moana as well, and but especially Tarzan and Brother Bear, where you also you not only wrote the score, but you also produced and arranged songs, and you worked with Phil Collins.
Yeah, and I think Randy Newman and I had dinner one time, and Randy said it's probably 3 to 4 minutes equals 1 minute in animation work. So if you're going to write a cue that's 1 minute long, it's like a 4-minute cue in a regular film, because it's so slow going, and because every frame in an animated movie really matters. The music really has to have meaning, or the animation just does not work. So it's tricky.
Yeah, I bet.
And as I said, I feel part of a bench with Disney and Pixar. I just feel like that's a great bench. I mean, those are real. I respect those guys, and they do great work. And so it feels kind of good to be in a little bit of that club rather than being in the action in TV club. It's just not something I am into that much.
Do you think that's, or have you ever heard that Disney has plans for releasing a sort of legacy collection of Tarzan and Brother Bear? They did that on The Lion King.
Yeah, they did that on The Lion King. I don't know. If they'll make money, they'll do it. I've never, I'm a behind the scenes guy, and I like to be behind the scenes. And certain composers are much more able and good at being in front of the scenes, and they tend to want to market that a little bit more than they would want to market things that I've done with them. So that was what was great about Moana for me was, again, very similar to Tarzan. And in fact, Tarzan, I didn't write any of the songs. Moana, I co-wrote songs and produced it and wrote the score with Dave Metzger. And so it was a tremendous undertaking, but I have such a huge part of that piece of work. That's something that represents in a big way what I'm capable of doing. And that was a really hard project. So, I'm proud of it.
Great. We previously mentioned the Lion King, the musical. I've heard, or I've been told at some point, that you had been planning an August Rush musical. Is that a fact, or is that just a rumor?
It's actually a fact. It's opening in Chicago in I think March 21st.
Really?
So, yeah. So we're in the midst of writing it and working it out. As a matter of fact, that's why my meeting with you is only going to be 40 minutes, because I have a meeting with the writer after this concern.
Great. August Rush is another really prime example of your capabilities. I really loved August Rush. I mean, it's so emotional, it's so in-depth, and actually I'm really kind of glad you just confirmed there's going to be a musical of that one.
Yeah, I tell you, I get more. I've always gotten more comments and good reaction from August Rush, and it was a movie that didn't do well at all. It didn't do that well, and it didn't make very much money at all, and a lot of people have never heard of it or seen it. But the people that liked it love it. So, and I loved the music, and it was very difficult. We wrote that whole end of the movie. We wrote first. That was the first thing I wrote, because they couldn't film the movie without that piece, and we had to deconstruct that piece for all the other scenes. So it was tricky.
Since you've been working on that musical, did you have time to even, work on some film scores in addition to that, or do you?
Well, yeah, I've kind of been. Moana took up 3.5 years,
Yeah.
so that was a gigantic chunk. And so the rest of the time, I have been working on this musical because the thing about this musical, John Doyle is going to direct it. John Doyle's a Broadway composer, a Broadway director who is known for actor-musician shows, which means that there is no pit band, there is no pit orchestra. Everybody in the cast plays the instruments that you hear. So it's a very small, 16 to 18 people group, and the actors are the band. So there won't be any big orchestral piece like there is at the end of the movie. There can't be, but to try to musicalize that whole story has been really daunting, to say the least. But we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting. It'll be different.
Great. You just mentioned that you had been working on Moana for a couple of years. I know that you have, or you've said it yourself, I believe, in previous interviews, that you have become rather picky as far as your projects are concerned. Does your selective process actually allow you to spend more time on a project? Because many composers, always tell these stories. I've had about 4 months, 5 months, 4 weeks to score a movie. Do you actually have the freedom to get involved so early that you can actually spend many years each time on a different project?
Well, first of all, I'm very fortunate because having been a composer of the Lion King musical,
Yeah.
that offers me a cushion that I don't have to feel like if I don't grab the next horrible movie, I'm not going to be able to feed my kid.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky and blessed in that regard. But I also don't take Aquaman, that movie came to me and I didn't want it. It was like, this is not what I want to do. I don't want, I can't really talk about my next project, but it is, when it came along, it was like, absolutely, that sounds like something I'd love to do, But I think the problem is that if you're in the Hollywood film business, then you really have to have additional composers that are ready to work night and day to do something, because you never know when something's going to drop.
Yeah.
And I've never been interested in doing movies like that. I mean, I did it in the 90s because I had no way to finish those movies that quickly. But that was never my goal, and that was never my intention to put my name on something that I've never even seen. And I just have no interest in doing that. I'm a classical guitarist.
Yeah.
So honestly, I'd rather study classical guitar, and I've written a concerto that's going to be debuted here in Carmel at the Bach Festival next summer. And I get more excited about things like that than I do about the next Marvel superhero.
Before we talked about that, I was going to ask you something else about Jan de Bond. I understand that you and Jan have had a great working relationship. I mean, you worked on Speed 2, Twister, and what do you think defined your collaboration with him?
I wish there were more people like Jan. He's a collaborator. He loves themes. He loves a good score, and he's an awesome cinematographer. And when Jan was doing, Speed 1 and he was riding underneath the bus with a camera and filming that stuff, that's when he's amazing. I think he just got very frustrated with the business because it's so difficult to stay on top. Once you have a bomb like Speed 2, it's difficult to get funding and things like that. But I loved working with him, and I would say the only person that paralleled him is John Lasseter. John Lasseter is the most inspiring guy I've ever worked with. If John Lasseter said, I want you to do all of my movies for the next 10 years, I would sign up in 2 seconds and I wouldn't even ask what they're about. And I've done 3 movies with him. He's a cheerleader. He's smart. He goes with his gut. He tells you if he doesn't like it, it's quite amazing, really.
There's one more director I would actually like to talk about, since you've done a couple of movies with him, Antoine Fuqua.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you scored Bait with him, Training Day, and Shooter. And Training Day was a film that actually, allowed Denzel Washington to kind of break out of his good guy image. Do you,
Right, right.
yeah, great performance by him, great movie. Do you feel that this film and score also marked a turning point in your career?
Well, I have to say that I think Training Day set the tone for a lot of crime drama type shows. I've heard it the approach to that film that I'd made. I've heard it everywhere still. So I think it was extremely influential. I don't think it ever gets cited. I don't think anybody ever talks about it. But that's, Criminal Minds, the television show, was based on my score from Training Day musically. So that's why I was hired to do Criminal Minds, because they wanted it like Training Day. And that's run for 13 years. So it's kind of amazing. Yeah, I think, the approach for me on that movie was Los Angeles, where I grew up, is a melting pot. It's not hip hop. It's not this. It's not that. It's all sorts of stuff. And I open up that movie with an Asian gamelan thing. And, because there's lots of Asians in LA. It's a melting pot of culture. And I wanted the score to kind of float along and not push you into the typical LA, what you think you're going to hear when they show shots of LA. You know what I mean? We all know what that is.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. I'm not the guy to do that, and I didn't want to do that. So I did a real floaty, orchestral, interesting score. I'll tell you something funny about Antoine Fuqua, because I really like the guy a lot. The piece of music in that movie that I believe it's in the end credits is Antoine's favorite piece of music I've ever written.
Okay.
But what he doesn't know is that piece of music was written for the scene where they're driving in LA in slow motion, and you see all the people and how scary it is. And he dropped that piece of music because he didn't like that piece of music, and then he stuck it in the end credits and said it was the best thing I ever wrote. So it's just kind of funny how that all works. And every time I saw him after that, when we would work on something, he would bring that piece of music and go, "Remember this?" And he'd play it for me. He'd go, "This is the greatest piece of music." So
it is.
Kind of funny.
They released an album of Training Day, and funny enough, as it happens many times, there were some songs on the album which weren't even, present in the movie, and those songs that were in the movie were not featured on the album, not like Cypress Hill stuff, and actually they included one score piece. It's called Wolf or Sheep.
Oh, Wolf or Sheep, right.
Yeah, which starts with the Denzel Washington dialogue, in which he, yeah, and then it's opens up with the music, the percussion elements, which you score for the movie when they're all on the rooftop, and discussing their assignments, when they're about to jack Scott Glenn's character. And then it kind of transitions into the end credit piece, which you just mentioned. So they did kind of a montage.
A little sweet, yeah.
It's a little sweet. And actually, I was glad they managed to put at least one score cue or one piece.
Yeah, I think my guy Marlon might have cut that together. I don't remember. I seem to remember that for some reason. So yeah.
I like Training Day a lot. It's one of those action thrillers I revisit all the time. I think it's one of Antoine's best movies.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I love the one piece I really like is the piece at the end. It's called Alonzo's Badge. I don't know if that piece exists on there, but it's an orchestral, very odd piece. It flirts with minor and major modes. I just always thought it was a really good piece.
Can you disclose, or do you have any idea why you and Antoine Fuqua sort of parted ways?
Well, he's not a loyal guy. I can tell you, because we did Training Day, and he hired Hans for the next movie. I couldn't figure that out after a number one movie that won an Oscar. Why we weren't doing the next movie together. But then he came back to me and said it was the biggest mistake he'd made, and we did Shooter. and now he's gone to Harry. But honestly, before I ever worked with Antoine, Harry worked with him. So
Yeah,
they've had a long friendship too, you know. So maybe he just, and Harry lives around the corner from him too. So I mean, there's probably that, because I did something with Antoine called Exit Strategy, which was a TV. They were trying to get it going, and I did some stuff for him. And I don't think he really liked the fact that I wasn't right in L.A. next to him. You know, I live up in Carmel, so I'm not there every day. So I think that might have had something to do with it. But whatever. I mean, I wish him well. You know.
Yeah. There are always several factors. I mean, you're right. Harry had worked with him on The Replacement Killers, which was in 98, I believe.
Right.
And then you took over scoring Training Day, and then Antoine did Tears of the Sun, right?
Yeah, that he did with Zimmer, I think. Well, you know, I loved working with Antoine, but he kind of bounces around, so you know, he's got to do what he wants to do.
I mean, maybe at some point you guys get to reunite.
Yeah, well, I hope he makes a good movie. I mean, I haven't, you know, really seen a film like Training Day come out of him, and I know he's capable of it. So I'm hoping he does something like that.
Totally. Besides, you know, scoring for movies, you had also written the music for an anime which is called Blood Plus, actually.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
What was it like?
That was really fun. That was really fun. Because the way that was done was that because the Japanese they can be so incredibly organized. And they wrote every beat of emotion that was going to be featured in this series, and then how long they wanted the piece of music, and the approximate BPM of the tempo, and then an example of a piece of music that they think would work. Mm-hmm. And they gave me this probably 120 pieces of music and events, and we had about, I don't know, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So I got Dave Metzger, who orchestrates just pretty much everything I do, mm-hmm. and Don Harper, and we just went through it, and you know, had to deliver everything to them, recorded in with orchestra, and in a pretty short amount of time. So it was really hard, but it was really fun because we didn't do anything to picture. Everything was at the top of your head.
Wow, amazing.
So, and it was really good practice to say, okay, Saya is walking on the beach and she feels very sad. Write that piece of music. You know, I mean, it was really fun to get all of those assignments and have to. And of course, the hardest thing and the coolest thing that I wrote was the diva, mm-hmm. The aria. I did that with Don Harper, and that turned out amazing. I had the theme, and I had it all worked out, and I gave it to Don, and Don, you know, got this girl to come in and just do vowels to sing, not saying anything. And I still see things on the internet where people are interpreting what she's saying and what it means and all this stuff. It's like a Beatles song. It's like everybody has their own idea of what it's supposed to mean, and it right. really means nothing. Right. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, that's very good music. And then also those albums have become really rare on the market. I mean, they go for $50, $150. You know, it's pretty. Yeah,
you know, I was going to tell you that my concerto that is being debuted, the second movement is based on Diva, that piece of music.
Great, great.
And the third movement is based on the theme from Twister.
Awesome.
So, these are written for classical guitar and small chamber orchestra. So it's kind of fun. I kind of worked some of the movie stuff into right. these pieces.
Well, yeah. Is there going to be a CD release of the concerto?
I don't know. This will be the first performance, so I want to kind of get some bugs out of it, and we'll see where that goes.
Okay. Mark, do you wish to add anything? Do you have anything else on your mind you would like to share with me or the audience?
Well, I would say the only thing that I would say is I'm a real advocate for people that can play an instrument.
Yeah.
And I hope that with technology doing what it's doing, I hope that people still believe in the actual playing of an organic instrument and hiring live musicians to record their scores and doing all of that, because there's such a tremendous difference between a human score and an electronic score. And
Totally.
because electronic scores are so much cheaper, they're really popular and everything, but they'll never replace 90 people in a room. So I hope that composers keep pushing for live musicians.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a whole different feeling. I mean, you can use synthesizers and write a melodic score or somewhat symphonic score, but you're right, you can never replace the real thing, obviously.
Yeah.
And but I also hope that scores or as action scores or any other score will become more thematic or more, say, expressive. I mean, there are still many great scores out there but if just like we had discussed early on in the conversation, themes are gone in action movies, and it's not the same as it used to. I hope that this trend doesn't continue, and that we will see an about face of that, and that more themes will kick in that genre. And
I agree with you.
I mean, it's so. I miss the days when every character used to have their own theme.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, when people say, "What's your favorite score?" I don't know that I have a favorite score, but the mission changed a lot of composers' directions because of the combination of ethnic percussion, choral music, but more than anything else, Gabriel's oboe is a beautiful theme
Totally.
that so many guys out there that are doing a lot of work right now couldn't write that in a million years, and so I hope that skill becomes again in fashion, so that
Yeah.
we have a new generation of guys that are really thematic writers come up.
Yeah. But it's a tricky business. I mean, although I think there are up and coming composers or prominent composers working today that could absolutely pull that off, but the studio or some executive intervenes
Yeah.
and says, "Oh no, I don't
Yeah.
want a thematic approach. I just want a themeless drone or whatever."
Yeah.
It's like you kind of kill the soul of many scores. And
That's why as I say, I was so fortunate to work with John Lasseter. He would never let that happen. You can't think of a John Lasseter film that doesn't have a great melody and score to it. There just isn't any, he won't let that happen. So guys like him, we need more of,
yeah, I mean, that's very true. And I think the younger generation of filmmakers sometimes somehow underestimate the power of music and what it can do. Or
That is for sure. You are spot on. You are absolutely right.
Thank you. I mean, it's many people complain about it, and I hope that we will, there will be a change in that direction, because there are still directors out there that feel like music is so important and we need to have a thematic score. I mean, just listen to for instance the Fantastic Beats score written by James Newton Howard's film directed by David Yates. I mean, that was one hell of a score, which had so many themes in it, and it's so orchestral and so beautiful.
Well, James Newton Howard knows what he's doing. I mean,
Yeah.
he's very good. I mean, that's what I'm saying, is that there's for me, and I wouldn't name names here, but there's to me, there's the guys that are the grown-up composers that are really, really strong and really good, and then there's a lot of other guys that for me are just don't know. I don't know. They don't. I can't get in touch with what they're doing. It doesn't move me.
Yeah.
You know,
Very
can I
true.
say? Well, listen, I have to run, so thank you very much. I really appreciate the fact that you're such a film music fan. That's really cool. You really know what you're talking about.
Thank you. I mean, I'm a huge. I've been a movie buff and film music buff all my life. It's my big passion, and there is nothing that I'm interested more, that moves me more than the film industry, and I couldn't be more passionate about it. And that's also why I reached out to you, as because I've listened to your music for so many years, and I hope we get to talk in the future again. Mark, I would like to thank you again for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate it, and I am looking forward to your next projects. And I really enjoyed talking to you, and it was a real honor and a pleasure. And let's talk soon.
Thank you very much. My pleasure too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.